He lost everything until a stranger in his trunk handed him the key to take down a billionaire empire. What happened next will leave you speechless. If you love stories where underdogs rise and justice wins, hit that subscribe button. Now you won't want to miss this. The old silver sedan wheezed one last time before collapsing by the gravel-strewn roadside. The sky had turned steel gray, threatening rain. Beside the vehicle knelt a man, sleeves rolled, hands, greasy shirt, once expensive, now faded and stained. Julian Brooks, 7 years old. Once hailed as the rising star of black tech entrepreneurship. Now just another man defeated by a game rigged against him. His company, Havenrise, had been everything. Until a sudden investor pullout and whispers of security concerns sent it crashing down like a house of glass. Julian was still reeling from the final loss when a tire blew on this desolate highway. He opened the trunk to retrieve the jack, but something shifted. At first he thought it was just the spare rolling, then a voice, soft, frightened, female. "Are they gone?" Julian froze, lifting the liner slowly, his eyes widened. There, curled beneath a blanket, was a young blonde woman. Dirt smeared her cheeks. Her hoodie was torn. But her eyes, sharp alert, pierced the silence. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you hadn't stopped." She didn't finish. But Julian already knew this night was no longer about a flat tire. She looked at him, desperation flickering in her voice. "Please, don't turn me in. My name is Isla Carrington." Before Julian could respond, 3 black SUVs emerged over the hill like shadows coming to life. They stopped behind his car, engines growling with authority. 3 men stepped out, government suits, earpieces, sunglasses, even in dying light. One taller and colder than the rest approached. "You seen a blonde come through here?" he asked. Athletic build. Might have asked for directions. Julian kept his hands on the hood, posture calm. "Just changing a tire, sir. Haven't seen anyone." The man's gaze was razor sharp. He scanned the interior, lingering on the back seat, then turned those eyes on Julian as if trying to read his soul. Julian didn't flinch, just sweat trailing down his spine. After a few tense seconds, the man nodded. They returned to their vehicles and peeled off into the misty horizon. Only then did Julian breathe again. The trunk creaked open behind him. Isla climbed into the back seat, trembling. Rain mixed with dirt on her skin. "They would have taken me," she whispered. "You just saved my life." Julian said nothing, but his world had already shifted. Inside the car, Isla curled into the back seat like a ghost chased from her own life. Julian started the engine and asked quietly, "Why are they chasing you?" She reached into her hoodie and pulled out a flash drive, sleek silver, dangerous. "Because I stole this from my father." Julian blinked. "And who exactly is your father?" She hesitated. "Then Edward Carrington, CEO of Carrington Global." The name hit Julian like a hammer, a name he had sworn never to say aloud again. Edward Carrington wasn't just a corporate giant. He was the man who orchestrated the downfall of Havenrise, Julian's dream, shattered by fake scandals and poisoned deals. Julian tightened his grip on the wheel. "I know him very well." Isla met his eyes. "Then you know what kind of monster he is." She held up the drive. "And I have proof of everything. Fraud, bribes, predatory targeting of minority startups." Julian exhaled sharply, hands trembling. "You just brought a bomb into my car." "I didn't have a choice," she said. Julian looked down the dark road. No map, no plan, only danger ahead. Well, he muttered, "I didn't have a choice either. But I hid you anyway. I didn't come to you by design." Isla whispered. "I was running. I saw your car and dove in. But I know what my father did to you." Julian's jaw clenched. The past wasn't just painful, it was still bleeding. He could have walked away. He could have kicked her out and driven off. But deep down, something in him knew this wasn't just her fight anymore. Then his phone buzzed. A stolen vehicle alert had been issued for his car. Carrington had moved fast. "He just flagged my license plate," Julian said, showing her the screen. "We've got to get off the grid. Now I know a place," Isla replied. "A cabin in the woods. My father bought it years ago for a project he forgot. I didn't." They sped through back roads until the asphalt turned to gravel, gravel to dirt, and dirt to silence. As the cabin came into view, weathered, half swallowed by trees, Julian whispered to himself, "At least this place doesn't belong to him." Isla opened the creaking door with a rusted key. Inside the darkness, Two people who had lost everything now stood beneath the same crumbling roof, sheltered not by safety but by resolve. The cabin smelled of pine needles and rot like it hadn't breathed in years. Cobwebs adorned the corners, but Julian didn't care. He plugged the flash drive into his laptop, Isla sitting across from him in silence. The screen came alive. Folder after folder, contracts, secret payments, offshore accounts. But one file made Julian stop cold. Operation Havenfall. He opened it with shaking fingers. Emails, timestamped log entries, orders. Edward Carrington hadn't just acquired Haven Rise's biggest competitor. He had orchestrated a cyber attack against Julian's company, leaked customer data, fabricated a security breach, planted whispers in investor ears. He didn't outplay me, Julian said, voice brittle. He destroyed me. Isla looked down, ashamed. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. He ruined lives, Julian said. Mine was just one of many. They sat in heavy silence. Outside, the wind scraped the windows like a warning. Then Julian spoke. We can't do this alone. We need someone who knows how to dismantle a machine this big. Isla nodded. Then let's find them. And in that dusty room, something larger than revenge began to form a mission, not just to expose, but to rebuild. At dawn, Julian and Isla left the cabin, their eyes hollow but focused. They needed someone who didn't flinch before power. Someone who could turn a flash drive into a wrecking ball. Julian knew only one such person, attorney Carmen Delaney. Her office sat in a forgotten corner of the city, no polished floors, no corporate logos, just faded walls and quiet defiance. When they walked in, Carmen barely blinked. She'd seen enough corruption to recognize it before the folder even opened. Julian set the flash drive on her desk. If you ever suspected Edward Carrington played outside the law, now you'll know for sure. Carmen plugged it in. As each file loaded, the flicker in her eyes sharpened. Her fingers drummed slowly on the table. She didn't speak until the last file scrolled by. You brought me more than evidence, she said finally. You brought me a rare opportunity. Opportunity for what? Isla asked, voice uncertain. To bring down a giant, Carmen said. But if we want to win, we'll need the world to see him fall naked and in real time. Julian didn't smile. He only whispered, then let's make sure they watch. Carmen made one call. There's someone I trust barely, but the government fears him. That afternoon, in a room buzzing with cold air and humming servers, they met Kellen Duong, a former cybersecurity analyst turned rogue digital warrior. Long ponytail, wire-frame glasses, calm like a boy not yet lit. He eyed the flash drive with detached curiosity. You brought me a holy grail of corruption, he said. And now you want to take on Carrington Global. We don't want revenge, Carmen said. We want to dismantle him. Kellen nodded, already booting up his triple monitor setup. Files unfolded like confessionals. Offshore laundering. Political manipulation. Algorithms built to bury minority-owned businesses in search engines. You're not just dealing with a man, Kellen said. You're dealing with a machine. Isla leaned forward. So we go through the front door, Kellen grinned. Better. We make him invite us in. Julian's eyes narrowed. We humiliate him on his own stage. We burn the mask, Carmen added. Kellen turned back to his keyboard. Then you'll need the right kind of fire. And in that basement, beneath city noise and blinking code, the first sparks of justice were set alight. They called it Operation Exodus, not just to escape the past, but to lead others out of its ashes. Julian sold the last thing he owned of value, his watch. A gift from his mother on the day he opened Havenrise. He stared at it one last time, then walked into the pawn shop without a word. Isla wrote a letter to her mother, long gone but never forgotten. She folded it into her journal next to a photograph of herself as a child before she knew what power could cost. Kellen built an encrypted network under Beacon Rise's radar. Carmen filed sealed affidavits and contacted 3 key allies inside federal circuits. Every night they met like a resistance cell, blueprints sprawled across cheap wooden tables, strings of red thread tracing decades of quiet crimes. On the eve of Carrington's biggest press conference, a $1.2 billion tech acquisition, Julian stood with Isla on the roof. Are you scared? She asked, voice trembling. Julian stared into the city. I'm terrified. She reached for his hand. Good, he said. That means this matters. And above them, the night held its breath, for everything was about to shift. The auditorium shimmered with power. Spotlights glared off marble. Journalists, CEOs, board members all dressed to applaud Edward Carrington as he stepped on stage like a self-made god. Today marks a bold new future, he announced, where Carrington Global leads with integrity and innovation. Behind him, a screen prepared to display stock graphs. Instead, every phone in the room buzzed. Julian's message had arrived. The truth about Carrington. The screen behind Edward glitched, then flickered, then came alive with hell. Bank transfers, bribe receipts, legal blackmail, whistleblower emails, internal memos referring to minority founders as risk factors, then a video. Isla's voice cracked through the silence. My name is Isla Carrington. What you're seeing is real. My father built this empire by destroying lives. Gasps erupted. Reporters shouted. Phones recorded. Stock prices plummeted live. Edward spun pale. Turn it off, too late. From the back doors, federal agents stepped forward. Edward Carrington, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. He locked eyes with Julian in the crowd. You think this gives you back your company? Julian shook his head. I don't want it back. I want something better for people like me. The empire cracked. The room exploded. News broke like lightning across the world. Headlines read, Carrington Falls daughter turns, whistleblower empire built on lies implodes. But far from the chaos in a quiet cafe tucked between two closed bookstores, Julian, Isla, Carmen, and Kellen sat at a corner table watching it all unfold on a small TV. Their shoulders slumped, not in defeat but relief. We did it, Isla whispered. Carmen took a sip of her tea. But this is only the first brick. Julian laid the flash drive on the table, the symbol of everything they'd risked, survived, and finally overcome. We didn't just tear down a man, he said. We opened a door for all the voices he tried to silence. Kellen leaned back. Then we're going to need space for them to rise. Julian nodded, eyes burning with quiet fire. We're not asking to join the old system, he said. We're building the one we never had. And so in the back room of a nondescript cafe, 4 unlikely warriors made a pact not of vengeance but of restoration. Not to burn the world down, but to rebuild it stronger, fairer, and free. 3 weeks later, Julian stood in front of a rusted warehouse on the edge of the industrial zone. Cracked bricks, a sagging roof. But in his eyes, this was not a ruin, it was the beginning. Beside him, Isla held a thick folder. What do we call it? She asked quietly. Julian looked up at the faded sky. Beacon rise. Because we're not rebuilding just for ourselves. We're lighting the way for others. Inside, Carmen and Kellen were already setting up with a small team. An ex-convict who designed adaptive prosthetics in prison, a young woman turned away from every pitch room because of her hijab, a deaf coder with a vision for inclusive education platforms. Every face held the same fire Julian once buried under his grief. We're not here to compete with the old world, he told them. We're here to replace it. They walked into the dust and shadows of the warehouse, 4 founders and a dream no one had dared to build before. This was no tech company. It was a revolution with blueprints, and for the first time in years, Julian wasn't just surviving. He was planting something. Carmen didn't just handle legal filings anymore, she taught. She created workshops for first-time founders, guiding them through contracts, investors, and how to survive in a system not built for them. This is a battlefield, she told a room of young faces. And if you step onto it without armor, your ideas won't matter. You'll be devoured. Isla too had transformed. No longer hiding from her family name, she faced it head-on. She used the remainder of her trust, what was left after Carrington's empire collapsed, to start a foundation named after her mother, the Eleanor Fund. Its purpose to support women-led ventures, community health programs, and social tech. It was more than reparation. It was a declaration. One evening, as she and Julian watched the city lights from the second floor of Beacon rise, she turned to him. Do you hate me for who my father was? Julian was quiet. Then he shook his head. No, because if you hadn't shown up that night, I'd still be broken. Silent, waiting for justice that was never coming. She didn't reply, but in the quiet between them, something mended, a fracture healed not by apologies but by action. In a federal correctional facility, Edward Carrington sat on a wooden bench in the visitation room, older and more hollow than the man who once ruled boardrooms with iron certainty. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted a paper cup of water. On the flickering TV above a news anchor highlighted Julian Brooks, The once bankrupt founder now leading the most inclusive tech hub in the nation. Carrington scoffed bitterly. Unbelievable. The failure becomes the face of reform. Across the table sat a young legal intern assigned to record his deposition. You still think this is about you? She asked gently. Carrington didn't answer. His eyes drifted to a weathered envelope in his pocket. He pulled it out but didn't open it. It was a letter. One Isla had written to him after the trial. He never replied. She said, I forgive you, but I won't follow you. His voice broke slightly. I raised her to inherit my empire, and she's building something I'll never understand. The intern said nothing. And in that silence, Edward Carrington, the man who tried to own everything, realized he had lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. At the Eleanor Fund's first community pitch session, Isla stood before a crowd unlike any she'd ever faced. No suits, no staged smiles, just survivors, strivers, and storytellers, people who had lived through the fire and were ready to build. A girl with burn scars pitched an app for trauma support. A single father introduced a childcare exchange program. A young non-binary coder had built a platform to help undocumented workers access healthcare. They didn't come asking for pity. They came prepared with solutions. I once thought being born with privilege meant I had no place among the wounded, Isla said. But the truth is healing doesn't care where you come from. It only asks what you'll do now. From the back, Julian watched her with quiet awe. This was not the girl who'd crawled from his trunk in fear. She was a lighthouse now. Later that night, Isla sat beside him and whispered, Do you think I've done enough to make up for the Carrington name? Julian didn't answer right away. Then softly, You're not erasing your past. You're rewriting its future. That's more than enough. Beacon Rise wasn't a startup incubator anymore. It was a blueprint for a new world. The halls buzzed with languages and accents once silenced disabilities, now accommodated ideas that once seemed too niche, now being funded, launched, and celebrated. Julian walked through the floor, past murals painted by local youth, past whiteboards, scribbled with wild dreams, past rooms named not after billionaires, but after community leaders. The wall of milestones displayed, 23 startups launched, 540 jobs created, 72% of founders from underrepresented groups. But it wasn't the numbers that mattered. It was the stories. The formerly homeless mother now mentoring teen girls. The veteran who built tech for PTSD. The autistic teen whose sensory-friendly design just won national awards. One night, Julian and Isla stood on the rooftop watching the skyline shimmer. Have we done enough? She asked. He looked at her, then at the tower rising in the distance built by one of their grantees. No, he said, because this isn't about enough. This is about what was never allowed before. They weren't breaking the rules. They were writing rules that had never existed and inviting the world to live by them. Each morning, Beacon Rise opened its doors early, not for million-dollar investors, but for those long shut out. Men with calloused hands. Women with accents ignored in boardrooms. Youths once labeled as statistical risks. Julian walked through the space greeting each founder by name. One man was crafting prosthetic limbs for children. A woman was building an app to help the homeless locate free meals. A trans teen coded in the corner headphones and building a platform for mental health access. I never thought I could belong somewhere like this, one whispered. Julian nodded. He knew that ache, the ache of being tolerated but never welcomed. Now they weren't begging for a seat at someone else's table. They were building their own damn table. That evening, Julian and Isla were guests on New Leaders Tonight, a national broadcast. The host asked Julian, "What's the secret to your success?" Julian looked into the camera, voice steady. There is no secret. Just one choice: to stop waiting for permission and to believe in the power of people the system forgot. And somewhere on couches and phones across the country, someone felt seen for the first time. While Beacon Rise soared, Edward Carrington sat behind barbed wire and concrete, reduced to a name on a prison roster. The empire he built had become an artifact. Headlines no longer screamed his triumphs. They whispered his downfall. One gray morning, a young woman from the Department of Restorative Justice visited. She placed a voice recorder on the table. "We're compiling testimony for a national report on corporate abuse. Do you have anything to say?" Edward stared at her. Why bother? She didn't blink. Because truth matters even when it comes late. Edward pulled a wrinkled envelope from his shirt. Isla's letter. He'd read it 100 times, never responded. She wrote, "I forgive you, but I won't follow you." He swallowed hard. I taught her to conquer. She chose to heal. The woman pressed stop. You don't have to redeem yourself, she said, but maybe you can stop haunting her legacy. For once, Edward said nothing, and in that silence, perhaps for the first time, he understood the empire he'd built was already buried by the very daughter he tried to mold. Isla never knew her father kept the letter. She was too busy pouring herself into something that mattered. That month, she launched a new funding round focused entirely on rural innovators, the kind of dreamers no one ever visited because they lived past the city limits. She sat cross-legged in a circle of young founders, many from overlooked towns. Some wore secondhand clothes. Others wore scars they didn't talk about. But all of them carried something powerful ideas born from survival. A teenage girl proposed a mobile solar charger for homes with no electricity. A veteran pitched a mental health hotline in his local dialect. A young mother shared her vision for a daycare cooperative in farming communities. I don't want to be saved, one of them said. I just want someone to bet on me. Isla looked around. That's why I'm here. Not because I'm perfect, but because I used to be part of the problem. Now I want to be part of your solution. As the sun set, she received a message from Julian. 4 more projects approved. She smiled. But deep inside, she still wondered, was redemption ever really complete? That night, the rooftop of Beacon Rise buzzed with quiet celebration. String lights swayed in the wind. Laughter mingled with the clink of coffee mugs and the hum of distant city life. Julian stood beside Isla, watching over the people below. Founders, artists, teachers, activists. Some had once been in shelters, others in prison. Tonight, they were all builders of something new. You know, Isla said softly the night we met, I thought you were too calm for someone who'd lost everything. Julian chuckled. I wasn't calm. I was numb. You can only be underestimated for so long before silence becomes your armor. She turned to him, eyes searching. And now I'm still underestimated, he said. But now I use it. She looked down at the ring he'd given her, no diamonds, just a band of thread and recycled glass from the building they rebuilt together. My father always said kindness was weakness, she whispered. Julian leaned closer. Then maybe weakness built all of this. And together they looked out at a world once closed to them, now unfolding with light grit and the soft power of the unapologetically kind. The next morning, an official letter arrived on Julian's desk from the Global Innovation Council. He'd been invited to serve as senior advisor for inclusive design and entrepreneurship. He held it for a long time, then handed it to Isla. It's not just for me, he said. It's for every founder they ignored. Later that afternoon, they gathered in the backyard garden of Beacon Rise, where a stone plaque was unveiled, Eleanor Carrington Center for Restorative Innovation, in honor of those who suffered in silence. Isla placed white lilies beneath the plaque. Her hand trembled. My mother never spoke up, she said, voice low. So now, I'll speak for her. That night, Julian typed the final lines of his keynote address. He looked out the window, not just at the skyline, but at the journey. A journey that began with a stranger in a trunk, a flat tire, a choice. He didn't destroy Carrington's empire. He made it irrelevant. And in its place, they had built something impossible to steal. A movement, a map, a future that belonged to everyone. When Julian stepped onto the stage at the Global Innovation Summit, he wasn't wearing a tailored suit. Just a charcoal shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands still rough from years of rebuilding. The room was filled with titans, people who'd once looked past him. Now they waited to hear him speak. He didn't open with stats or slogans. He opened with a moment. There was a night, he began, when my car broke down on a dirt road. I was broke, bitter, done. Then I opened my trunk and found a woman with fear in her eyes and fire in her voice. A hush fell. That moment didn't change my life because it was dramatic. It changed my life because I chose to listen. He looked directly into the crowd. Power isn't taken, it's shared. And when we start sharing it with those who've been silenced, we don't lose. We multiply. The applause came slowly, then like thunder. Isla watched from backstage, eyes damp. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like the daughter of an empire. She felt like a builder of futures. After the summit, journalists, executives, and politicians wanted interviews. Julian gave none. Instead, he returned to Beacon Rise. The hallway was filled with post-it notes, bright paper squares from residents tacked along the wall. One read, "Thanks for betting on a girl who only knew code and chaos." Another, "I pitched my first client today. I was terrified. Then I remembered what you said, fear is fuel when you're honest about it." Julian ran his hand across the wall slowly as if touching the lives he could never fully measure. In the kitchen, Isla sat with Naomi, the first mentor who had believed in their mission. Her hair was grayer now, her voice still fierce. "You've created something dangerous," Naomi said with a smile. "Not because it destroys, but because it proves the system can be reimagined." That night, the team shared warm food and stories, laughter echoing across the rooftop. They weren't founders tonight. They were survivors, believers, family. One sleepless night, Isla pulled out an old creased sheet of paper from her drawer, the letter she had once written to her father but never mailed. She unfolded it slowly. Her handwriting, once trembling, now felt like a whisper from a version of herself she barely recognized. "Dear Father, you taught me ambition without empathy. You gave me tools but not the reason to use them. You built walls. I've been breaking them ever since." She paused, then continued aloud as if releasing ghost. "I used to chase your approval. Now I chase impact. I don't hate you anymore, but I will never follow your path. I hope one day you understand you didn't lose me to failure. You lost me to purpose." She folded the letter, walked outside, and burned it in a small fire pit. Julian joined her, silently placing a hand on her back. Ash floated upward like tiny lanterns in the night. Some farewells don't need words. Some healing comes not from confrontation, but from choosing to move forward anyway. Spring arrived with quiet grace. Beacon Rise had outgrown its first home. Now 3 new campuses were opening in Detroit and Albuquerque, in a remote Louisiana parish. Each campus would follow the same blueprint: no application fees, no investors with strings, no savior complex, just co-creation. Julian stood before the first cohort in Detroit. Dozens of hopeful eyes looked back. He saw versions of himself in every seat. The boy who was told he'd never amount to more than potential. The girl who learned to smile through every closed door. The mother balancing code and a crying toddler. "You're not here to be rescued," he said. "You're here to be remembered." Isla, watching through the live stream, whispered, "We built a place where courage isn't an exception. It's the culture." They didn't need statues. Their legacy lived in the lives they had dared to lift. Not every seed they planted would bloom, but enough would, enough to change the soil. Years later, a young woman in a red hoodie stood outside Beacon Rise, staring at the plaque. Julian, now older, approached with his quiet smile. "You looking for someone?" he asked. She turned. Her eyes were wide, but not frightened, curious. "Not someone," she said. "Something. A second chance." He opened the door and motioned her in. "We've got plenty of those." Inside, light streamed through tall windows. On the wall, a photo of Beacon Rise's founders hung beside dozens of portraits, every graduate, every dreamer, every rebel who stayed the course. And in a frame above the staircase were 7 words that had carried them from ruin to revolution. "Kindness isn't weakness, it's where empires begin." The stranger walked in, and this time she wasn't in a trunk. She was home. Sometimes the people who break us also give us the reason to rebuild stronger, wiser, and for something bigger than revenge. Because kindness isn't weakness. It's the spark that starts a revolution.